Hi, my name is Anand Mahadevan and I've been a teacher for about 12 years now. I teach at UTS and here I've been teaching for about 10 years and I've taught many different science courses. I've taught grade 9 science, grade 10 science, these are general science courses, as well as grade 11 and 12 biology, grade 11 physics and grade 11 chemistry as well. Throughout this time, I've been interested in how mobile technologies can support students in the inquiry process, especially in opening up new ways for them to capture observations and reflections, as well as to support them in creating knowledge that we can then use in our classrooms. I've been excited to see various research projects that have developed ways for students to use phones and tablets to upload photos, adding geotagged observations, for example. And I think it's an exciting new opportunity to engage students in the kinds of mobile activities that they're already used to in their social lives. For example, they take photos, they tag observations, but this time we can actually get them to upload those photos and observations to create a larger collection that can be analyzed as data in the science classroom. So I was quite excited a few years ago to discover the Zydeco project, which is from the University of Michigan, and they offer this tool free of charge to science teachers. It was built originally to support students when they're off on field trips, for example, if they're going off to a museum or some other informal setting, allowing them to pursue a set of common questions that can help guide individual students' different experiences. So what would happen, for example, is students can wander around the museum or a zoo and they can add their own evidence and claims to answer the questions. So this allows for diversity in terms of how students can gather information while at the same time they're creating knowledge, because now all of this information is added into a common web inquiry space, and this allows both the teacher to track what information students are adding, but also for students to actually use information from all of the students who've been at the zoo. So for example, if I've been going to the gorilla exhibit or the orangutan exhibit and I'm gathering data here, I can also get data from other people who might have gone to the hornbill exhibit or have taken data from polar bears. So the whole corpus of evidence is available from the grade, while each student also has ownership because they've contributed to the data that's in this corpus. So I decided to use Zydeco in my grade 11 biology classroom when students visit the Toronto Zoo to learn about biodiversity and conservation. And just to give you a sense of it, in the past, students would normally be given a sheet of paper and it would be a multi-page printed handout, and then they would basically fill it out. And my observations in the past were that when I'd be walking around the pavilions, I'd often see the students, their head bent low on the paper and writing it down, and they're actually spending more time with their eyes away from the pavilion and on the sheet of paper. So one of the things that we were trying to do in replacing this paper-based activity is trying to actually get the students to interact more, whether it's the animals in the exhibits, or to talk to zookeepers, or to actually talk to other patrons who are visiting the zoo, so that we could actually have a more engaging experience where the kids are actually interacting with the exhibits more. And by replacing this paper-based activity, we're also interested in seeing if all these observations which are gathered can be used to reflect on the overall understanding of the zoo. Because otherwise, keep in mind, if you have a paper sheet, the child is only looking at their paper sheet. They don't get to see what others have written on their paper sheets. So in collaboration with Dr. Maria Nino, who's another UTS teacher, we actually created a Zydeco version of this worksheet we used to use with our grade 11 students. And first, the two teachers, Dr. Nino and I, worked together to establish a couple of common guiding questions. Like, what is it that we want the students to get out of visiting the zoo? What is the inquiry that we want them to do? And so we came up with a few questions. The first question was, for example, what are the unifying principles that underlie biodiversity? So in this particular case, the students are gathering information about biodiversity, but we're also asking them, when they're measuring this diversity, can they see some unifying principles within there? The second question was, what can the zoo teach us about human impacts on biodiversity? So how do the exhibits, the actual ability of the animals to be in there, what does that tell us about biodiversity of the animals in the original habitats? And we worded these questions in such a way so as to try to get students to pay attention to the cross-cutting features of animals and their habitats, and to look for examples that would actually get at higher order thinking claims. So to help them with Zydeco, the first thing we actually did is we actually tested it in class. So a few days before we went to the zoo, we actually got them to load up the website on their phones and then just walk around the school to gather some data just to get familiar with the technology. And that way then, when they go to the zoo, they're just learning how to use Zydeco at the zoo rather than learning to use Zydeco and learning to gather data at the zoo. So by separating it temporarily and doing a lesson on, hey, this is how Zydeco works, let's figure out how to take photos with it, how to do audio memos with it, how to do video with it, so you're actually doing it in a low stakes environment and learn the technology and then apply it at the zoo visit. Once we actually got to the zoo, we talked about the high-level questions and we motivated the students to find out more. So in terms of getting the data, we asked them, what did you already know and what kind of evidence or claims would we need to get from the zoo trip? So once we've oriented them to the Zydeco software, we've handed out iPods, we've practiced logging in, all of those sort of low level dealing with technology and overcoming barriers to using technology that are now dealt with, we can actually make sure that we answer any questions, there's no confusion, and also not make assumptions about whether kids are always familiar with iPhones, iPads, etc. So on the day of the zoo trip, students are incredibly excited because number one, they're getting to use technology. They're basically doing things that they do for fun, which would be things like tagging photos in Instagram or making posts Facebook style. And they're moving from writing on paper to a much more rich visual experience. So I would say that Zydeco was an enhancement to their zoo experience, definitely not a hindrance, because at this point of time, remember, the kids know how to use the program when they're at the zoo. And so it helps keep them engaged. We had about 600 pieces of evidence collected at the zoo, which is far more evidence than a student would normally have used if they were writing the answers up on paper. They might have used at the most maybe 10 to 15 pieces of evidence to answer their claims before giving up. Instead, now we have about 100 kids, each of them putting about 10 or so pieces of evidence into a common pool, creating a much richer pool of data that they can then come back and look at. So we found the level of engagement was higher, the level of interaction with exhibits was higher, the level of interaction with zookeepers. Before, maybe 1 or 2 children might actually think about talking to a zookeeper. But now a lot more children felt comfortable going up to a zookeeper and saying, hey, would you mind if we asked you a few questions on video for a school project? Because they felt like they were like reporters on a television show, which was more exciting for them. Now, once we came back from the zoo, we had a database of these videos and images, and ultimately these bits and pieces of evidence that the students have gathered contained the answers to the questions that the teachers had posed about biodiversity. So what we did then is ask the students to use this high quality, self-generated data to come up with rich evidence-based answers. So we came back to the classroom and we took over the library of the school, and we had this whole class reflective discussion in the library where I brought up the idea of, okay, here's all the evidence we had collected. So I put actually the 600 pieces of evidence on the screen so they were aware that they had generated this huge database of knowledge for themselves. And then I asked them, okay, do they think what they can get the answers in there? And of course, they felt very proud of this database that they created, and they felt more secure that they would have answers in them. So we then let the students work with the data to come up with their own analysis and synthesizing of their ideas. We created a homework assignment where students then could access the classroom data using the Zydeco website at home and then work on much deeper level analysis to the questions. Here's some evidence that I have that there is in fact unity in biodiversity. Here's some evidence that I can present to show that the zoo is making attempts to present animals in habitats that mimic the original habitats, or that the zoo is maybe not doing such a great job about showing the relevance of the habitat to a specific animal. To me, Zydeco is an example of the potential of mobile technologies, especially those that are well designed to support K-12 students, so that the classroom can actually expand beyond the 4 walls and the chairs and tables we have in our school. Obviously, you could use off-the-shelf tools to support similar forms of inquiry. For example, you could use students to get the camera that they normally use and just upload the device, the pictures from an SD card, for example, if you wanted to do that. You could also post images to websites like Twitter or Pinterest using a unique hashtag so that they're searchable, and then you can combine them. There's also other interesting applications in science where students are able to use phones or tablets for citizen science projects. For example, they could go out and look for native species and tag them using photos, which could then be sent off. A butterfly cataloging project, for example, uses this in the UK. As a teacher, I'm really sort of interested in all of these approaches, but I know that students won't really learn from the experience until I carefully design a corresponding in-class activity, and I've sort of thought about it before and afterwards. Technology can be very fun, but without a structure in place, it's merely that, just fun. How do we in fact make sure that there's also learning involved? So we're all using our phones and mobile computers in an increasingly wide range of context. I think it makes sense to bring these technologies into our classrooms and create those opportunities for our students, as long as we as teachers are putting thought into making sure that these uses are well connected to the curriculum goals we have in our classroom. And that's really the idea that I would say, is that as teachers, we ought to be open to the idea of technological resources. We ought to be open to the idea that inquiry can be done in other ways than what we used to do when we were kids. And so it's bringing that balance between, hey, here's fun technology and here's my curriculum. Let's bring them together so that we can have fun and do science at the same time.